we're good. We're green. All right.
All right. We're ready, but.
So I think we have everyone remote. We have everyone in person. So why don't we call to order? It's about 6:02. All right. So we'll start with roll call. I am here. Ken.
Present.
Jamie.
Here.
Thank you. Jason.
Present.
Dave.
Here.
All right. Dan.
Here.
Nancy. I think she's there, right? Or if you have to unmute her. Oh.
She is there, but she
Here, I'm here.
There we go. Thanks, Nancy. I knew you were there somewhere.
Okay.
Good.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Jackie, no. And I don't see Lisa. No, so I guess so we do have a quorum, so we're good there. Jackie's gonna step back. As you know, there's two people that are appointed from the school committee. So Nancy's one of them, Jackie was the other one. And so she's gonna step back, and there's a new person. She couldn't make tonight, Lauren Loomis, so she will make the next meeting, and that's when we'll do a reorg, I believe, when she comes on board. So we thank Jackie. She was very helpful, especially because she worked so hard on the Blanche Ames School. So that was great to have her. And we'll go from there. Okay, so the first thing is we'll take a look. Everyone got those meeting minutes? Anyone have any questions, comments, concerns about the meeting minutes from July 11th? Alrighty. I had given one little thing to Kathy that we sorted out, just an acronym thing. Okay, hearing none, I'll take a motion to accept the minutes.
So, Carlson.
Carlson, do I have a second?
Second.
Jick. All right, we will take a vote. Me, yes. Ken?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
And Nancy?
Yes.
All right, so those pass. All right. I always forget, we are being recorded, just so you know, on the cameras there. So I just wanted to let everyone know that. All right, so why don't we move on? If someone wants to fill us in, I don't know, Walter, if you want just real quick about the Blanche Ames.
Yeah, absolutely. So really the only stuff that's wrapping up now is phase 2 punch list, which is taking on the fields. It's really landscaping at this point. And the installation of the new scoreboard. So there was an old scoreboard that was taken down as part of our project. It was going to be reused. It got reused on another project for the new softball field behind the high school. So we purchased a new one as part of this project. So the foundation excavation started yesterday for that. So that's really the only thing going on over there right now. The ribbon cutting ceremony for Blanche Ames is Sunday, August 20th, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. I believe there's touch a truck with the fire department. There are food vendors and drink vendors, soft drinks and coffee. Yep.
Food trucks, coffee, police and fire will also be there.
Yep.
Ribbon cutting, including one for kids, tours, really fun.
Excellent, great. And that's the softball field, the new one that I saw back there? When you said that scoreboard, is that for that new softball field? Yeah.
Outfields of the softball field.
Yeah, I took a drive over there after our tour, and it was nice.
Very nice.
Very nice. All right. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns about the Blanche Ames School project as it pretty much wraps up? All right. Dave, you want to give us a quick update on the treatment plant?
Sure, not too much to update since the last update a couple weeks ago. Biggest issues working through supply chain issues with VFDs on both the Red Mill Road treatment plant and the PFAS treatment plants. Still trying to get the PFAS treatment plants up and running. We're very close, and hopefully we'll be running producing PFAS-free water very shortly.
All right. And what's the expected completion date? At least the building, not so much the shed ones, but the building.
So Red Mill Road is December of 23, and the PFAS treatment plants are now.
Okay. Anytime now. Are those the ones, are they missing VFDs? Do you need them for that, those sheds?
We can get by without the VFDs, using the old pumps. They won't pump optimally, but we're working on a media issue right now, just making sure the quality of the water is where we need it to be.
All right. Anyone have any questions, comments, concerns for Dave regarding the treatment plant? All right, thank you, Dave. All right, why don't we move on to the main topic about the public safety project? You want to take it away, Walter?
Yeah, so should be a quick presentation today, and then we'll run through that live exercise for final decisions and vote. But it'll be a local outreach update and approval details, project scope and budget. So Greg will be and KPA's team will be going over life cycle cost analysis, and then we'll do the value management total project budget.
So just as a kind of just reminder of all of the upcoming meeting dates, I think you've seen a lot of this. We're here tonight to go through and come to a total project budget to be pushed forward into the approval process for the town. So the next couple meetings are kind of following that through on municipal government level to get that into town meeting and then vote for the total project budget. Those dates are here. I think we now have a final date on the town meeting and the ballot vote. So October 23rd and November 4th will be the vote days for both special town meeting and ballot.
Just one quick question, is that probably going to be at the high school at the atrium?
Yes, that's the plan.
Okay.
So we looked at that when we had the town meeting for Glen James debt authorization. We looked at voter turnout from prior debt exclusions in the preceding 2 decades, and we wanted to be overly cautious because we thought there might be higher turnout. But
Sure,
in the
yeah.
end, the amount of people who came to Stonehill, that was even with childcare arrangements, with parking and busing, was about 1,000 to 1,100, which could fit in a high school.
Yep.
But you can fit that. We'll work with schools on overflow in the event that we have a larger turnout here, but the plan is to go to high school.
At high school?
So now we'll just get into the life cycle cost analysis, and I just wanted to kind of explain a little bit about how the life cycle cost analyses are done and just what it typically looks like. And so this is kind of a typical life cycle cost analysis. Typically, we would be comparing against an ASHRAE baseline, which is kind of a standard, way to design a building. It's based on the building code. Standard ASHRAE baseline is the minimum code standard you can build to. So you take the gross capital investment, so how much money it costs to build it. You look at the energy costs that it uses over the life expectancy of the system, and you then compare that to options 1, 2, and 3, different variations on systems to see against that baseline comparison how quickly they return the additional investment in capital cost. We kind of have flipped that on its head a little bit in Massachusetts because we've now entered a stretch code that is, I'd say, significantly different from the ASHRAE baseline. And if you have found the same, we're so far ahead of the ASHRAE baseline that comparing to the baseline for you guys is kind of not a fair comparison because it's something you can't really choose. The baseline in ASHRAE is not the baseline you can choose. So all of the scenarios we show you are overly rosy compared to the baseline, even though you can't choose the baseline. So what we've tried to do here is just kind of simplify it and make it a little bit more relevant to the choices you have in front of you. So we're sticking basically with the same thing, but we're not going to compare to a baseline. We're going to compare to a system that's very close to what is minimally required within the stretch code. Again, the stretch code is relatively new. We're still kind of learning things about it. The technical guidance for modeling these things is still, I'd say, up in the air a little bit on some particulars. So with that caveat, we've done, to the best of our knowledge on what the systems are, giving you kind of the best forecast we can. So we'll jump to the next slide, which is taking kind of the baseline system that we have told you about, which was the base and the estimate, and compared it to the two other options, which are both VRF options in the estimate. One is a VRF option with air source heat pump. One is a VRF option with ground source. So similar systems inside the building. It's where we are expelling the heat and taking the energy from. One is air, one is water. So just gross capital investment, you know, the air source is actually a little bit less expensive upfront than the baseline system. And it nets out at a slightly better return on investment, and the savings is instant, right? The savings is instant because it is less expensive than the baseline system, so it automatically pays back, you know, instantly. And the overall energy cost is less, and even though the maintenance cost is a little bit higher, the energy cost makes up for it. The third system, so the third option, the upfront capital cost is quite a bit higher. So, and we're only looking at the public safety building. We didn't want to confuse the matter by looking at all three buildings at the same time. So we're just focusing on the public safety building here. All of the buildings will trend in essentially the same way. They're slightly bigger and smaller than each other, but they're the same functions within the buildings. They're going to trend the same way in the model. So as you can see here, the return on the second option is instant, but we don't reach a return on the ground source heat pump option. And the reason for that is the upfront cost of the wells, essentially, or the ground source heat loops is expensive. It's adding $2 million to this one particular building, and so we're not paying back. We're about $500,000 in the hole when you get to the end of the life cycle. But this isn't the full story, right? This is just without any incentives. When we're working now, we have two incentives that we're looking at with ground source heat pump systems. The first one is mass save, so there is a mass save rebate, and then there are adders to that rebate that are kind of geared towards ground source heat pumps. That adder gets added, so in the next slide, we'll hop to...
Can I just stop you 1 second?
Sorry.
I just wanted to go back. That first option you showed, that's more traditional from what I can see, correct?
Yeah, I mean, they're still doing a lot of the energy saving things that we would do, and it's slightly better than what's minimally required in the stretch code because we're using demand control ventilation, which is not a requirement in the stretch code, but that's sort of semantics. We think we need it to get to the energy performance we're expecting. But you can see, you know, the EUI is the total energy usage in the building per square foot annually.
Mm-hmm.
You can see how it drops. We're at 127 in the base, right? If we compare that back to, remember we talked about Mansfield was like 185, something like that. When we jump down to option 2, we're dropping into the 90s. When we drop down to option 3, we're dropping into like 85s. It's a little higher than we expected, but keep in mind, what's driving these things are schedule generally. These are 24/7 buildings, so the schedule tends to drive that number up. If we were talking about an elementary school, we'd be in the 20s because the schedule is much different. So even though the systems are the same, we're heating and cooling the same kind of spaces in some cases, because our schedule is much longer, the number gets higher. So it just, that's kind of how these things work. And so now I just want to talk about kind of the benefits of the system, like each option, and then we'll show it with the reductions for the incentives.
For the rebates and things, yeah.
And so on initial cost, you know, none of these systems are inexpensive. These are all high cost systems. You're not going to get a cheap system in Massachusetts to meet the energy code. It just kind of doesn't happen. That being said, the options are, sorry, I have 1 and 2 flipped. Option 2 is slightly less expensive. That's a mistake on my part. Option 3 is the highest. For energy rebates, option 1 and 2 still have decent energy rebates on them, but compared to the third, they're relatively low. In
option 2, even though we have air source heat pumps for the majority of spaces, we're still using gas-fired boilers. They're condensing boilers, they're high efficiency, but we're still using gas-fired boilers to heat primarily the apparatus bay. We're heating and cooling we're heating that slab with radiant heat. Same thing would be true in the BPW, same thing would be true in the fire substation. In those cases, to do that with electric with an air source heat pump gets really, really expensive in demand peaks. So we use gas because currently the gas rate that you pay per therm is much less than electrical.
Yep.
And so kind of the benefit of the ground source system is it kind of takes down those peaks and valleys. It evens it out a little bit more where when you're sinking or expelling to temperatures that are low or high, you lose some efficiency where ground is almost always between 45 and 55 degrees. You have a much more constant temperature. In turn, your equipment can be kind of fine-tuned in to run much more efficiently, particularly during those peak demand times. So that's just kind of part of the benefit there. But with that, those adders for air source heat pumps are eliminated in the option because we don't get below the COP 2.0 baseline.
Mhm.
So you don't qualify for those in there. Still, cost-wise pans out to be the best, but you just lose that incentive. That's not the case in option 3. In option 3, we're using that radiant heat, the water loop for those heating elements is controlled by the VRF system through the ground loop heat exchange. We can do that more efficiently, so we're doing it there.
Just one question, Greg. When you say like all electric HVAC option 3, would the generator for that building be able to meet that load in the case of a power outage?
Yes, it would be
Okay.
sized to do that.
Okay.
And so the HVAC in this case is all electric. We still have gas-fired hot water heaters. We can talk about that at a future date. Right now, we can pre-wire for them to be changed to electrical at some point. We're not planning for. There's a next step to the stretch code, which is an opt-in code, which is essentially a net zero all-in, an all-in code. We're not designing to that. It's just simply we can do it in option 3, all electric, fairly efficiently. It's just on life cycle of the lifespan of the equipment. 20 to 30 years is about the lifespan of the equipment. We model to 30 years with the expected equipment. I would say at option 3, the ground loops are good for 50 years. This is a closed loop system, well tested. The piping is similar to what you would have for your domestic water service in town. It's pretty well tested, time tested system. You'll have to replace equipment, but you can reuse those ground loop systems. And just the payback on ASHRAE, if we were comparing these systems to the 90.1 baseline, option 1 would be 4 to 6 years. Option 2 would likely be instantly. It's enough lower that it's going to be so close, it's going to be basically instantly. And option 3 is probably going to be between 6 and 8 years with the mass save rebates, because we would still get the mass save rebates. We're just looking at this against ASHRAE baseline without the Inflation Reduction Act money. So we'll get to the next slide. There are 2 rebates. We talked about mass save. There's a second federal one that is Inflation Reduction Act. So it's 30% with some deductions of the system cost. So we've accounted for that both here in the life cycle cost analysis and also in the value management exercise that we'll get to in a couple minutes. So just to point out kind of the money all in that we get back. So off of that $5 million or 5.7 million comes almost $2.5 million. So you take a $5.7 million initial capital investment and you net the investment down to about 3.4 million. So in that case, you now jump below the initial investment of the baseline option. I will say that the Inflation Reduction Act is a new thing. We haven't gone through the process yet. It does require some accounting work on the town's behalf, some filings and things like that, and it would be a rebate, much like the Mass Save. So you would have to spend the money and then get the money back in rebate, but there is a lot of documentation coming out of the IRS and the Department of Energy about these grants. They're pushing them fairly hard. I don't know, Dan, if you guys have started to see them come into play.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, if people have actually seen a real case.
Not me personally.
This was released this year.
Yeah, I know it's new,
So
yeah.
it's a brand new
This is,
thing.
I mean, they're still releasing documentation, so.
It's
Have we seen anyone apply and actually get the money yet?
it's too early.
Yeah, it is,
I think.
okay.
The system has to be up and running and commissioned, I think, with documentation and things like that. I think there's just not enough
Correct.
enough instruction from the IRS yet on how to exactly file for it. So I would expect before we get to this, project, we'll have that better. So I guess our recommendation tonight is that the committee consider including option 3 in the budget, with the caveat that through the design process, we will go back and reassess these numbers to make sure that these things, hold true. That the cost, the energy savings, the cost for the project benefits stay true as we go through the process. So because option 3 is the highest cost upfront,
Up front, yeah.
if the committee is interested in it, which I think based on our last meeting seems like you are, that you carry that in the budget so that we can have the option down the road, if this pans out to be the consistent case, that we stay with that.
And if we carry that number, we can even go back to option 1 because we'll have the funds per se.
So you would probably go back to option 2. That's going to be the most similar, and you could in theory end up with a mix of 2, in certain cases to kind of tweak the budget if costs come in higher than expected in some areas. I'd say that these incentives are driving demand for geothermal systems pretty quickly. So the market is changing. Hopefully it will garner additional drillers, which are tending to drive the cost up. So as demand increases, as the costs increase, that entices people to come in.
Mhm.
So this project is pretty well positioned because we have a couple of years before we get to that point, and by that time we should have a little bit more competition in the market, and we're hoping that drives down prices. That's not always the case, but the hope is that these things are driving this. And Dan, I think 5 years ago, how many geothermal jobs did we done? 2, 3. Recently, it's been 3 or 4 a year. So the demand is there. Projects are going that way, and that will hopefully find its way back to the trade contractors that did the work. So.
The other option that's opened up is you can actually price this as an alternate. So the same mechanical engineer just did the Hingham Foster Elementary School with us, and they carried option or something very similar to option 2 as their base, and then carried option 3 as an alternate. They actually got very, very competitive pricing, which is why we're seeing a spread between our 2 estimates, because they saw those numbers come in, but they got option 3 for a fraction of the cost of the premium that was originally estimated.
And that was an alternate on the bid.
That was, yep.
Thoughts
I mean,
for the?
that's-
I was gonna just hit
That's
the.
down the road,
Mhm.
but that is an interest. I mean, there's more. Just you pay for a little bit extra design work to carry 2 systems,
Mm.
but that's an interesting option. Greg, if in option 2, if we used an electric boiler and plant instead of gas fired, can you get incentives?
You can. So you get the incentive, but when we looked at it quickly, the incentive got overrun by the electrical
The extra cost. Okay.
Yeah.
Because we're, you know, the apparatus bays, the storage areas for the DPW are so big, and the recovery time, you know, the doors are huge, right? They open up, you're running like moding units to make up air quickly in there so your sprinkler heads don't freeze, things like that. So that demand on that electric system kind of kills the incentive that you get, because the air source adder is so much lower than the ground source heat pump adder. So the air source heat pump adder is, I think, $1,250 a ton. The ground source adder is $4,500 a ton. So it's like 3 times the adder for the ground source, which is why the ground source is so attractive. And look, these incentives were not, you know, written in a vacuum. The costs all in are essentially lining up through the systems, right? That's what the adders are to do. They're to make the geothermal systems and the all-electric systems more competitive with the gas-fired systems. It's a pretty specific way they've written the incentives, and it seems to be panning out in the pricing. Pricing and trade costs are going to fluctuate. You know, from time to time, these things were written probably 2 years ago, and they seem to be, relatively speaking, pretty dead on. So,
Does anyone else have? I was just going to throw it out to the group if other questions want to come though. Greg, Jason, if you have
I guess
anything.
my biggest question was with the potential of going with the ground source option and that being more electric. I wasn't sure if there were any plans, any thoughts on if solar's going to be on the building, how much the solar may carry that, because the solar may be an upfront cost, or maybe it's an offset against what we'd be paying the utility, and at a certain point in time when you own the panels, then maybe your electric is far less costly, just as a way to 15, 20, 25, 30 years down the road, depending on what costs and the terms of the borrowing to be able to do it would be, is doing something like that, is it reasonable to help lock in potential long-term, utility costs, as we project out over the next 2, 3, 4 decades?
yeah, so I think a 2-part answer. So the buildings are prepped and ready for solar. The stretch energy code kind of demands you do that now. The base energy code had a little bit in there. Stretch takes it to about 40% of the roof area, and the gear within inside the building is sized to take a pretty significant PV load. It's also, I would say, sized in the case of both the public safety and DPW buildings for not in their initial gear, but there's space for additional gear to power, future electrified vehicles. So we're not going to put in the gear now because we just don't know enough about what that's going to look like. But the space is there in order to do that in the future. In terms of kind of buying solar panels up front, that market is a little tricky sometimes, and the panels tend to be a little bit expensive when you buy them yourself. You do get the biggest bang for your buck when you own the panel usually, but there is operations and maintenance that goes into that. There are some risks involved with panels keeping things up and running. But Easton does have a fairly robust purchase power agreement program.
Yeah,
I think
that's most
have
places.
some existing. We're looking at some more.
We're already at somewhere once we move forward with roof-mounted solar for Bland James, will be close to 80% of our municipal energy consumption being offset by net metering or other solar credits that we're generating. We've never gone around purchasing and owning the panels ourselves for the reasons Greg has just said, that we don't really want to be in the business of trying to maintain the panels. So I think in this case we'll have to see what that environment looks like if and when these buildings are built, but they're being designed so that they're ready for that roof mount, which is the same process we went through with Bland James.
Yeah.
So it was being designed. We didn't want to pick or bake into the project budget costs for voters to consider any kind of guaranteed savings on solar. made sure to lead with that's goal, and we will design it so it's ready for that mounting, and that's what we're doing now. That's what we're gonna do here. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, regardless of the system that the municipal building committee wants to go with as far as HVAC is concerned, we would still look to provide it the regulatory environment with credits and things like that allows it, within how much we're generating, put panels for and offset costs in the
And the reason why that like purchase power agreement type of scenario just has to wait a little bit is because the environment in which those things are procured is has ebbs and flows, I'd say. There's a somewhat complex system that I will not attempt to explain because I will get it wrong, that make it more beneficial for installers or providers to enter into agreement on purchase power agreements at certain times. So as windows open up in the program, in certain areas, they're more incentivized. So from the town side, you can kind of plan when you go out for that procurement, or whether you go out kind of on the street for procurement, or whether you go through power options, which is kind of a buying consortium option. You just time that right, and the incentives from the power company are right to get you the best price for the electrical you most likely buy. In these cases, because you're going to want to kind of shave your peak demand, they would most likely be behind the meter systems, because as you electrify the building, right, you want to shave down your peaks, because you're never going to get rid of all your consumption. What you want to do is take your peak demand and lower your peak demand. So doing it behind the meter shaves those peaks down, whereas doing it kind of in front of the meter, like say the landfill, doesn't do that for your building. In the landfill, it's a great option because you don't have a building you're offsetting power to. In these buildings where you're trying to electrify, you want to shave those peaks down so you don't get hit with the peak demand charges. So I think the town has an excellent consultant that they use for the procurement and negotiations of those options. We've worked with Beacon a number of times, and I can't say enough great things about them and the work they do to make sure that the town gets the best value for the asset that it kind of lives on. So.
Anyone else questions? Jamie or Nancy, did you have any questions about this mechanical that we're going through these options?
I have no questions at all, thank you.
Yeah, no questions as well, thanks.
Okay.
Can I just confirm, so what you're looking at is just a joint public safety building?
Yeah, so this is just the joint public safety building, so these savings will be kind of the same percentages and things like that as you get to the other buildings. So just, if you compare the annual, combined annual expense of option 1 at $200,000 to option 3 at $160,000, it's about $40,000 a year in total combined savings operationally. Now again, you're able to make that up in the scenario where you have the offsetting rebates, or you don't have to make it up, but it's really attractive in those offsetting rebates. When you don't have the rebates, it's not as attractive, you don't really pay back. So you're reliant on the rebates for a strictly financial model, and I'm not advocating for that be the only reason why you make a decision, but the rebates really do make a big difference in these cases as they were designed to do.
Just a ballpark, Greg, if you didn't get that second one, right, the Inflation Reduction Act, what would the ROI be there instead? You said 6 to 8 with no rebates, right?
Yeah, compared against the ASHRAE baseline, if you're comparing it against option 1, it's basically going to be like a 25-year payback without that IRA incentive. And here's kind of how we can tell that incentive, so the 1.728 million compared to the total life cycle savings 1.78.
You're close.
You're close. So that's really making the difference. So you break even, right, on the system. You get everything out of it that you put into it, but the payback is long without those incentives. So if that for some reason were to drop, I'd say that would be the case where we would want to go back and look at, okay, are there areas of the building we can change to air source heat pump? Maybe we keep some of the geothermal and we make office areas air source and we make other areas ground source. We would dig into those kind of finer detailed options at that point to make kind of the budget work and make the paybacks.
But we'll have that option as we go
Yeah,
down the
I'd say
road
that-
during design
that's
development
still
or
an
carry an option
You're
or
not-
something.
You're not going back to like an ASHRAE baseline
Yeah.
system. We just don't have those options
Yeah.
here, so you're not fundamentally changing the approach.
Yep.
We're just kind of changing where we expel heat to and drawing energy from.
And pretty much, I think that was the option we talked the most about. Is there anyone who has any changes of heart, I would say? Because we were basically looking at geothermal last time. It seems like we're still on that track. All right.
And I think we have time. We can see how the bidding. We have a couple of years.
Yeah, find out
See how
about
the
that
bidding
number.
environment evolves, especially.
Yeah, it's so new. Yeah.
Like geothermal, which is
We have
relatively new.
3 or 4 more estimates. We'll get a lot more data before we, really put this stuff out on the street.
As Chad said, it'd probably be an alt to.
Yeah,
If we
yeah,
aren't comfortable.
Pricing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, that's like a little bit of an upfront cost for us to carry that extra scope in the drawings, but it might be worth it. But we have time to make that. I think we can say this is our preference, and we're going
Correct,
to
yeah.
study it.
Yeah. All right.
Come back to it.
So again, the goal here is to set the budget.
Yeah.
Right, not to necessarily pick a system.
Sure.
One leads to the other, but the goal is the budget. We can get to there. We have time to be, responsible.
All right.
So I think that's everything we have on life cycle costs now, so we'll jump over to the Excel spreadsheet that we were looking at.
While Walter pulls that up, my same spiel, there's not a lot of fat in that project. Scrubbed it, there's not a lot to cut. Usually a schematic design, we don't wanna even talk about cutting square footage or wall finishes or flooring finishes, that's not usual fair game of schematic. You're generally looking at bigger ticket items, but in this case, there just isn't much fat to trim in that project, so that's why some of those items are on the list here. The last time we met a few weeks back, we took the feedback live and we updated it and plugged in comments and tried to get a general feeling for where the committee was at and moved around the accepted and rejected based upon that general feeling we had at that time. So Walter can run through line by line and just recap, and if anyone wants to talk about anything in more detail, we can go into
Sure.
more depth on it.
Can everyone see that, by the way?
Not very good.
Is there a way to? Yeah, I was gonna say.
I thought mine
Yeah.
was small, but.
So we can probably fire down pretty fast as we went through these in depth last time, and just slow us down if you want to talk about anything.
Yep,
in more detail.
so first 2 items are what Greg just spoke about, are the 2 types of systems, the one without the ground source heat pump and the one with. First one being in the rejected column, second being in the accepted column. So green mean it's being carried within the budget when we get down below, red meaning it's had been discussed as rejected by the committee. So we had accepted the change for the fiber cement wall panels, which is in the base, kept that in the base. We had the rejection of the, in lieu of fiber cement, finding something else. We're really at a durable costing with the fiber cement panels. Reduced plantings, that was accepted for $44,000. And then the square footage, we had discussed that these programs were really necessary. We were tight at that building already. There was programming spaces between the public safety building and DPW that we found areas that we could combine them in the program, but at the fire substation, that building is already so tight, well programmed, there really was nothing to cut out of the building without actual program cut. So none of those were carried in the base, those reductions were carried in the base. Change vertical granite curbing, again, a nightmare for DPW taking care of that building. We wanna make sure these buildings can, this group wants to make sure these buildings can be taken care of safely, that you're not doing repairs to landscaping, you're not doing repairs on a yearly, if not twice a year basis. And then deleting the 3-inch acoustical roof deck. again, not a recommended option, just on there, and I think we've talked about that death by 1,000 cuts. There's really not a lot in these buildings. It's a $50,000. So that's fire substation. We'll jump down to public safety building. So the first two items are the ground source heat pump, the geothermal carried in, and then the VRF not carried in the scope. Composite metal panels with the Rayner bond that's carried in the base. Durable, high durability, easy to maintain product, long life cycle. Public facing building, public's going to be at it, whereas the fire substation not as much public use. So something that is more durable and less likely to be damaged by someone near that building. So we had the option to go down to fiber cement wall panels at certain areas, or equivalent wall assembly. So about a $240,000 savings there. Areas where the public wouldn't be. That was the idea on that one right there. 14, reduce aluminum curtain wall storefront system by 20%. That was rejected. Again, another one of the items that really doesn't serve to get the budget down to a significant lower cost. Reducing 15 and 16, reducing floor tile. Again, both rejected. One of those was a duplicate at a certain amount of square footage. Those were rejected as porcelain floor tile is highly durable. These buildings are, as we talked about, they are used 24 hours a day. There are people and staff in those buildings, public. You want to be able to clean those buildings. You want to be able to take care of those buildings and not have anything damaged at those buildings. Again, here at the roof deck, same as the fire substation, really needed in those apparatus bays. You're not going to be able to hear anything if you're working on a truck, a call. You need the police or people working in those areas to be able to have safe environments to work in. It's really not beneficial to them to not have that. Poured resin flooring, a design feature. Again, another one of the items, really a death by 1,000 cuts, and a lot of work right there for a specific detail on the resin flooring. Number 19, delete wall covering. This was accepted above the crash rail. $150,000. The committee had discussed that. So anything above 5 feet above that crash rail would be removed. Change vertical granite curbing. Same item as the fire substation. Not a desirable option for the people taking care of those buildings, DPW, highway. And then we talked about the square footage, which is carried right there. The four items for for police, where KBA along with Chief Boone were able to find efficiencies in the programming that these spaces weren't needed, so the square footage can be reduced slightly in these buildings. And then on fire admin, again, 2 areas where those areas could be reduced and taken out of the budget. And then we jump down to DPW, change porcelain wall tile to FRP in the locker rooms, $46,000 savings. Change vertical granite curbing was not recommended. Square footage base for DPW, again, not a desirable. This program is tight as it was at the fire substation. Really nothing to cut without leaving another building operational or another program at a different location. And that's not the goal of the project. It's for consolidation, so that these buildings are able to be maintained and that the program can operate together. Down below 33 and 34 are the mechanical alternates, the ground source heat pump, again carried in the base, along with the alternate above that. Canopy, this was one item we had talked about carrying that as a potential alternate, $562,000. We have this item as yellow in our notes, so we are currently carrying this as an alternate.
Out of the base scope, you bid as an alternate, so if the bids come in favorably, you can roll back in.
Deleting the storage bins, as we had talked with Dave, easy for the DPW to take care of those and construct those. And then 37 is the water department space funded through enterprise fund. Again, this is not being carried in that estimate you'll see down, or the numbers you'll see down below, but that is the, one of the items that town administration and town accountant are working on right now, to see how that can be funded, through the enterprise.
Mhm.
Then the last four items in gray here really are not, scope, these are, budget decisions and ways to look at the funding mechanisms of the project. So item 40, again, discussed, these projects are coming straight out of the ground. They're sites that haven't been utilized. Project team's recommendation is to go with the general contractor delivery method as opposed to the CM at risk. And then we have an option on here that we will discuss down below on the budget, which is reducing construction contingency in the overall total project budget. And we'll show you what that means down below when we get to it. And then item 42 and 43 are what Greg discussed with the Mass Save and the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, not carried down below, but knowing that they're part of the discussion for bonding purposes and for total project budget.
I will just note on 43, this is, the total there is slightly different than you saw last
yeah.
time. Just to explain what happened, we have two estimates that varied pretty significantly on the geothermal cost. When we did the initial calculation of the rebate, it was based on the higher of those, which is what we used in the life cycle cost analysis. In the value management exercise and the total project budget, we are averaging those two costs. So it's averaged by building, so it tends toward the higher estimate, just based on how the estimates worked out between the buildings. But we've now taken the reduction on the averaged cost, not the higher cost. So you see that number knocked down a little bit. It's because we aligned it with the number we're using in the budget for the average cost. So we're not, over promising the savings that we'll get from that.
So jumping down below, we had a reconciled estimate from AMF, the estimate of record of 114.3 million. Revised with as the committee has been discussing and what the first pass at that value management, which really the main difference there is the acceptance of or decision to go with the geothermal, brings you to a potential of 118.2. Again, those are construction cost values. And then the discussion down below in red is reducing contingency to move the project total project budget up and down. Not a recommendation at this point in time to reduce the construction contingency, but we wanted to show you what that reduction of construction contingency would look like. We are at about 28.8 on soft costs right there with the 7.5 construction contingency. So with how this looks right now, a total project budget would be anticipated at 152.2 million.
And it's really a funding exercise too, because you have that 4 million potentially is coming back at the tail end. So that 152, and then with that 4 million back at you to the 148, which has been the number floated out there. For optics reasons, we wanted to make sure everyone understood what was being carried for construction contingency. For comparison purposes, the Blanche James School was carried at 6% initially. Total expenditure upon completion was around 3%. So those are generally industry standard numbers, but your biggest risk items is taking a building out of the ground. And in this case, you're taking multiple buildings out of the ground on 2 different sites. So you do have probably a little more risk just getting out of the ground than something like Blanche James would have. So it probably warrants that small bump in contingency, but really just a cash flow exercise and a messaging exercise as far as what the number is versus what the rebates could come in at and lower that down to.
Dan, what are your thoughts on that from a contingency standpoint? Because you see it more than I would.
I mean, these projects seem fairly clean to me. I honestly, anywhere in that range, I'm personally fairly comfortable with. I think 6% is fine, 7% is fine. Again, this is a little bit of a kind of a numbers game right now.
Yeah. Obviously, yeah.
gets a little bit more real the closer you get to bidding.
Just
I
so,
mean, honestly, if you wanted to throw a dart anywhere in the middle, it's
and then
close enough.
I don't, if anyone didn't see, like, just showing with the rebates.
It brings it down.
That's what
Yeah.
Jack's spoke about.
Mm.
Yep.
But from a town meeting perspective, Connor, would you have to vote on the 152 because you just don't know about those, right?
Yes, you
Yeah.
would authorize the total budget, just like we did with Blanchard.
Yeah.
The total budget authorized was 95 million, even though we knew we had 30 something from the state coming, and we now know obviously the actuals are close to the mid-70s. So, you know, we've done a lot of these big projects in the past 10 years, and it's certainly tough, and we all wish it would be easier and smaller to run the front end, but generally it's better, in my opinion, from the kind of messaging policy standpoint, to have the contingency and be more conservative as far as having a higher number than we all think it may land. That sometimes makes it harder to get over the hill with approval, but the inverse where we cut too deep and get too confident, especially with this volatile. The last thing I want to do is invest a significant energy that you all have and we all have to make an appeal a project this size and be penny wise and pound foolish and, you know, say, oh, you know, it's 140, not 150, and then you have to go for a supplemental authorization for $2 million or something like that, which is, you know, the budget is small. So
Sure.
I think we'll confirm with finance, I'm fairly certain that we would seek the authorization of the total amount, even if we don't anticipate permanent borrowing for it due to those incentives and agreements. And then at the end of the day, the net function for taxpayers is we won't pay for it, for that $4 million. It will just never show up on the tax levy.
All right. Do you want us to vote on particular things at certain points?
Really, the only vote that would be needed would be the acceptance of the value management as presented, and then the vote to approve the project scope and budget at the 118.2 and 152.2 to recommend to the select board. Maybe.
Yeah, so those are approximates because remember we have two different estimators, so
Sure.
just like with the geothermal, we're using the average numbers on the VE savings, some estimated. In one case, one estimator might be higher, the other one's higher, so it'll be around that number, but that's the average number right now between the estimates.
I think it's worth pointing out as well that that number is the full all-in budget. That's not the exact same number as what will be used for tax impact analysis because this doesn't account for what would be paid in water enterprise.
Yeah, we're not, all those things will net out down the road. Yeah. All right. Well, why don't we,
That includes the geothermal option.
This does.
Aye.
This does. Yeah.
Yep.
That's these.
so yeah, I was gonna say, well, if you accept the geothermal credits in the water enterprise, what is that? Just so we know the number.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It won't give you an accurate read on the total project budget because the soft costs are a function of construction, so when you drop construction, your soft cost out, it'll give you a
Yeah.
construction number.
Just from a
That would
ballpark.
be the new
Yeah. Okay.
Construction.
The general funding construction.
Okay.
So
And just a ballpark.
We could rerun that scenario too with the soft cost projection.
Yeah, but the soft cost held and then
Yeah.
you know.
I just wanted to see, get your eyeballs on it. All right. Does that,
That puts the general fund construction in the ballpark of 100 flat-ish.
all right. So do we want to someone want to make a motion to accept the value management as presented in what we've gone through? Do I have it? Loud and clear, we heard you, Jamie. So you have a second? Zick, all right.
Do we hear from the chiefs and Dave, just if they're buying into that?
Sure, I'm personally comfortable with everything I've talked about tonight.
Yeah, I am as well.
I wasn't-
We've had several times we've gone through this, we've cut what we could and we knew what this number was.
Yeah, I apologize. That's a great point, Ken. Sometimes I'm tunneling here.
I assumed it.
Yeah.
They were working with us, so.
Okay. All right. So why don't we'll start that one out again. Why don't we just start again for a motion to accept the value management?
So,
I'll just stay with Jamie. And
Second.
second will be Dan. All right. All right. So I am a yes. Ken,
Yes.
Jamie,
yes.
Jason,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
and Nancy.
Yes.
All right. All right. So that passes, and we might as well. Any other questions, comments, concerns about those final numbers we saw up there? I think we've gone over them pretty much.
Based on these.
All right, hearing none. So I have a motion to accept the project scope and budget that's been presented.
I think we wanna,
Or do you want to keep going?
probably better to do would be the, motion to accept project scope and budget based on the value management discussion to recommend to the select board. Is that the? I think that's what we wanted to do.
Okay, so we want to vote to recommend it to them, and then they would make the ultimate decision. Is that the way you'd like to proceed?
Yes, I mean, I don't.
They're the ones that
real-
will call the election.
Yes, I don't think,
Yes.
not to downplay the significance of technicality, we're all very technical people in this room, but I think what either of those is fine
Okay.
for the municipal building, big vote for the project scope and budget, right? For the select.
Okay, so why don't we'll just go to that third point then.
Yep.
The vote to recommend project scope. So do we have a motion to recommend the project scope and budget to the select board?
So moved.
Carlson, do we have a second?
Second.
Dan? All right. Roll call vote will be me, yes. Ken?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
And Nancy?
Yes.
All right. So that motion passes as well. All right, anything else on that end, or?
Nothing else on PMAs and Greg, anything else on AJA?
All right.
That's all we have.
All right. And we did talk about a project letter of support vote. We had done something similar. I think we've done for a couple of different things, but the last was the Blanche Ames schools. So I think what I'll just do is if you want, I can draft a letter and we'll pass it to the board next time, and we can review it.
Sure.
How should long? Yeah, what is that? Do we have that time, Connor? Like, how quick do you
So-
want that?
Real, the select board, I'll be delivering based on your votes just now, I'll be giving the select board financial impact analysis of this project at the next meeting, August 21st.
August 20th.
Uh, Well, we can obviously infer the committee supports the project, your vote, we
Mhm.
have a letter by then.
Sure.
That would be great. I think what you did last time, was that the committee voted to authorize you to sign.
That was my point. That's why I was asking about a time frame.
Sure.
Does that make sense that I could just draft a letter like we did last time? You know, just a letter of support.
Sure.
Yes.
All right. So I will do that, and I will, because I think what you threw up a date there for our next meeting, right, Walter? But that was September, so
Yeah, so next meeting we had.
it was September 11th,
12th.
12, so the
September 12th. All right.
select board meets the 21st.
So by your next meeting on the calendar, the select board's working on, they announced last night for informational purposes, the intention of having a special town meeting on October 23rd and the debt exclusion election on November 4th. They do need to take formal votes on that, but they're scheduled to do both by the time we meet next.
Yeah. Okay.
One more screen share, sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Is that the website? Yeah, it did look, yeah.
Let everyone know, I know select board announced that last night, the project website is live. It is eastonpsw.com. Everything that we've kind of discussed as part of this group is up here. There is a contact us page, that'll get right to the project team, for responses. There's also a project Facebook page that is now live as well. So we'll be going through, posting updates here based on decisions made by the committee, and giving out pieces of information, and then posting prior to public outreach meetings or anything like that. So we'll try to hit those, a few days before, a couple days before, to let people know, hey, if you want to come out and reach out. But all the information's up here. One nice feature on here that I wanted to point out for people who have not been to these buildings is the existing facilities page. There are some videos on here, 5 to 7 minutes, that highlight the existing conditions of the police, fire, and DPW. They're pretty surprising to see what these guys do in these facilities. So I'd recommend people take a look.
Excellent. I already did. It was excellent. Yeah. There's everything there, especially, all the minutes from these meetings and everything was on there. So,
They're credit to TNA, they built it. They did a good job.
I think the goal is to spread that around. That's what I've started doing. Yeah, spread that around to anyone.
We socialize that, we're sending it to everyone we can. This is the opposite of Spectrum, it's very low tech, but we will be sending a postcard to every house in Easton this month. Same exact, I think has been pretty clear, we're taking and copy and pasting a lot of what we take
Sure.
from James. So same thing, we'll get a postcard out before Labor Day to every house in Easton. That lets people know this project's heading to go this fall, there's a website to learn more. We're just triple checking the dates, but we'll establish, so the votes will be October and November. We'll have community forums and tours at the facilities in September and October.
Mm-hmm.
So for folks who haven't followed along the process or been learning about it for the first time, they can come learn a lot pretty quickly on that website. They can come to one of the forums or tours. We'll have them at these facilities, so you can kill some birds with one stone. So that'll be going out this month.
Good. Excellent. All right. I think the only other thing we have is municipal building visits. So just to give everyone a recap, was it last Tuesday? It was a week ago. So last Tuesday, we did go visit the Easton Middle School. Dave was very helpful, and Dave Twombly both met us there, as well as a couple other reps from the DPW, Easton Public School, and took us pretty much here, there, and everywhere. So and I think it was Ken and Jason, right, came? Mm-hmm. Yep, so there were 3 of us who walked the school with them. And pretty good feedback. I thought what just might make sense is we have a record of these visits, because as you know, under the charge of the Municipal Building Committee, we're supposed to go through every 5 years and walk through a building. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll put together a summary of that visit, because I think at the end there's always recommendations we want to make, to Dave and the town as far as future projects or projects they're considering both. So what I'm going to do is I'll just put that together, and then I will send that off to the group, and we can discuss that report. That is something I think we want to vote on before it kind of goes into the record per se. So I think it would make sense. I will send that along prior to the next meeting so people can read it. It will be kind of a standard, maybe like a building conditions assessment type of, format, something like that. I didn't know if anyone had, not that we're not going to be very busy, I think in the next few months. I didn't know if anyone had thoughts about the next building. It might not be for a few months if there's another building we wanted to hit. I'm trying to think, Ken, how many we've hit in the last, we hit a lot in 2019.
Yeah, but we did DPW, we did fire.
I think we did all the municipal buildings.
Yeah, we did all the fire stations.
We probably need to go back into the schools like RO, high school.
I guess, yeah, because we spent a little time at the high school for the,
Left, really.
yeah. Yeah, and based on this, we don't need to go see maybe the water department building and things. So I guess maybe it makes sense. I think RO is probably the next one left that we haven't seen. So maybe, I think it's going to be a couple of months just because of the schedule and everything else we have to do. So, but we'll put that on the radar for the next one. All right, I think that was it for the agenda. Anyone have anything else? All right. So all I need then is a motion to adjourn. Carlson. I have a second. I was gonna say. All right. All right. I am in favor. Yes, Ken.
Yes.
Jamie.
Yes.
Jason.
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
And Nancy.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
All right.